Located north of Highway 126 on an 8-acre site is an unoccupied farm labor camp in Piru, California. Built in 1950 by the Piru Citrus Association, the housing represents the remnants of another era in the history of California agriculture. During World War II, shortages of low-wage, mainly agricultural workers was projected, leading to the establishment of the Bracero program. Created by a U.S. government executive order in 1942, the Bracero program brought millions of Mexican men to the United States to work on short-term agricultural labor contracts. From 1942 to 1964, more than 4 million workers came to the United States and were critical to the economic development of agriculture during this period. The program has been called the largest and most significant U.S. labor contract program of the 20th century. With a moderate climate and fertile soil, agriculture has been the dominant economic force in Ventura County since the late 1890s. With the salaries of farm workers being historically low, most ranches and agribusinesses have provided some housing for their workers, either in the form of bunkhouses for single males or individual houses for families. Part of the provisions in the Braceros Agreement was to provide the workers with food and lodging. At the beginning of the Bracero program, the Piru Citrus Association provided tents for braceros that were located behind its packing house.
Before they built the camp, there were braceros living in back of the packing house in the tents.
In 1940, Herculano Villaseñor and his father owned a Mexican restaurant in Fillmore.
And then they bought a lot in Main Street and they built a restaurant. And then when 1942, when the Bracero program started, they called my father-in-law if he was interested in cook, and then my husband helped him. So they were partners, my father-in-law and my husband.
Mr. Villaseñor was the one that was in charge of feeding the braceros, so he was the one in charge of the kitchen.
With World War II well behind them, growers demanded the importation of Bracero labor, so they built the Piru Labor Camp in 1950. The Piru Citrus Association hired F&P Growers, an independent labor contractor, to operate the camp, acquire the labor, and to pay the workers. The farm labor camp was for single men who were housed in bunkhouses, 4 beds to a room. They ate their meals at the mess hall and bathed themselves and washed their clothes at the community laundry facilities in the center of the compound. Surrounded by California pepper trees, 10 buildings in the cluster forms a rectangular plan. The office building, which also served as a recreation room, classroom, and lunchroom, is located at the southwestern corner of the rectangle. The mess hall and kitchen is located at the southeastern end of the cluster, measuring 32 feet by 107 feet. Three bunkhouse buildings are located along the eastern edge of the cluster. The first 2 bunkhouses are nearly identical and were built in 1950. The northern of the 3 buildings was built in 1927 and moved from the rear of the packing house to its present site in 1950.
They built a new camp in 1950, and then they moved some of the barracks that were in back of the packing house. They moved them, and they moved them by the river to set them up at the camp, actually.
Located along the northern section of the complex, this one-story bunkhouse was built in 1927 and moved from the rear of the packing house in 1950. It is a long rectangular plan building measuring 24 feet by 80 feet.
Introduce you to a room where you have here a bed and a closet where the braceros used to sleep and keep their clothes in the closet. And usually the rooms were organized where you had the bed alongside the closet, and you essentially had two people per room, and in each of the rooms usually were often located right next to each other. So this is just one example of where they were housed in the Piru labor camp.
Located at the northwestern corner of the cluster is this one-story bunkhouse built in 1927. It is a long rectangular plan building measuring 24 feet by 48 feet. Two concrete foundations remain from two bunkhouses constructed in 1950. These buildings burned down in a fire set by an arsonist in 2007. This one-story washroom and laundry building was constructed in 1950. It housed 14 toilets, 4 urinals, 6 wash tubs, 6 basins, 2 gas heaters, and 14 showers. Located adjacent to the mess hall, this small 8 feet by 10 feet building was constructed in 1951. This small, low, gable-roofed office building measures 15 feet by 15 feet and is constructed of concrete blocks. It was constructed in 1955 and is located just west of the entrance to the complex. The swimming pool, constructed circa 1975, is located at the northwestern edge of the complex, and it has long since been filled in.
My husband came in 1951, and he was a bracero. He came, his brother had been here before. He was here already when he came in. And then his brother left for Mexico, and then my husband was sent to Oxnard. I think he worked there lemon for a few months, and then they brought him back to work back here in the oranges, because it depended on the season. They would move him around. Well, the one in charge of the kitchen, working in the kitchen, was Herky's aunt, and she knew my husband, and so she asked him if he would want to work in the kitchen, helping her cook, and he said yes. So that's the way he started to learn how to cook with her, because she's the one that taught him, Mrs. Gonzalez. And then when they closed the camp in '71, then he went and he was working as a foreman. He was a field foreman.
And so why did they close the camp?
Because there wasn't enough men in the camp, and they had, a lot of the men were living in town. They were afraid of the immigration. So a lot of the men were living in trailers and in garages, and there wasn't enough people in the camp to really make it go. It was oranges. Here in Piru, it was always Naval and Valencia, always. And sometimes they would have, well, grapefruit, but not that much. But it was here in Piru, all around the ranches around here. What happened was Mr. Creason, after the amnesty, my husband and I had moved to Mexico, and he had left his job with a company. He was a foreman, and we decided to go to Mexico. So we went, and then it came up, it was in 87, it was when the amnesty started. And then they called him to come back to help him to take this course, to help him to get the guys to be legal, amnesty. So it was for him to get a part-time job. So we came back, and we were here he has to start on the 1st of June of 1987. So we came back on the last of May to be here, and he started, and he worked in that year. In 87, when it finished the amnesty, we returned back to Mexico. But before we returned, they offered him if he wanted to open up the camp, because now the people they were picking, they were legal knives. Tried it to open it up in 88, April the 1st of 1988. And we came and we opened it up until 2001. If it would be a good year, it would be like, say, it would finish with, say, even 80 guys in November. But you would mostly always start with a few, say like 23, 25, or that amount. And then it would just keep on going up, because a lot of the men would go to Mexico with their families. So they would come back at the time when they would do their taxes. And when we had the camp, we would cash their checks, and we would do that for them and deposit it into the camp's account. So they would always come and stay at our camp because of that other thing that we would help them. As far as I know, they were treated okay. I never heard of nothing that they were mistreated. Never. We just rented it. We paid so much a month. And then later on, when Mr. Shefferly got the position after Mr. Creason, he started, we weren't paying for utilities. But then after he came in, we were paying for utilities, and it was running quite a bit. Then we had to pay insurance, which we didn't pay when Mr. Creason was manager. The camp was under like an umbrella insurance with a packing house and everything. And then at the very end, well, I couldn't afford anymore. My husband had passed away, and I couldn't afford anymore the insurance that I had to pay yearly for the camp. It's my husband, when the men would get here and they didn't have money and they didn't have where to stay, he would always let them stay in the camp, and he would feed them until they would get a job. Sometimes they wouldn't be able to start working right away. Sometimes we had men there for a whole month before they were able to get a job picking oranges, and we were feeding them, you know? So he got to see that because he didn't have papers at one time, and he had a rough time, and he knew what they had going through. So he would help them a lot, a lot. We started April 1st, 1988, and we closed it September 29th, 2003.
Nacho Guevara died in 2001. Mary operated the camp until September 2003, when it became economically impossible to continue. The camp has been dormant since then.